everyone, my name is Onjali Raúf. I am the author of The Boy at the Back of the Class. I've heard that lots of you have read it, which is just amazing. That makes me so happy. And I'm going to be talking to you today about my journey towards writing this book, all the amazing people who have inspired me to write it, because it was something that wasn't really planned in my life. So I want to talk to you about the story behind the story. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to share some slides because I think it's much better to see some pictures rather than just see me waffling on. So give me a second while I share, and hopefully this will go smoothly. Yes, it will, which is amazing. Right, let's do it. Let's do it. Right. Oh, jumped the gun. Okay, so The Boy at the Back of the Class, for those of you who have already read it. For those of you who haven't, don't worry, I'm not going to give anything away. But The Boy at the Back of the Class is a very simple story in lots of ways. It's about a boy who walks into a classroom and the narrator is desperate to be his friend. But this boy seems very strange. He's very pale, very quiet, doesn't speak English. And when the narrator finds out that he is in fact a refugee boy, they go out of their way to help him do something quite spectacular. Now, the creation to this story is a long journey that was undertaken by myself. And I think it began quite a long time ago when I was 7. So this is me at the age of 7. As you can see, my mum loved embarrassing me, which is why she tucked my jumper into my pants all the time. But I'm showing you this picture because 2 things happened to me at this age that I think led me here. The first thing was the local library. So at this age, I couldn't afford to buy books. My mum and dad were working very hard, but we couldn't afford to buy books all the time. So the library was the most important place for me and my little brother. Now, my little brother didn't like chapter books. He didn't really like reading these kinds of books, but he loved comic books. So we didn't have much to share because I was a huge book reader and he wasn't. But one day, my mum picked myself and my brother up from school. We went to the local library and the librarian was putting up a massive new display of everything to do with Tintin. Now, for those of you who know Tintin, you'll know that Tintin is an undercover reporter. And of course, the narrator, the boy at the back class, loves Tintin. He's an undercover reporter and he goes around the world on these pretty fantastic adventures on one mission. Tintin is always on the quest for one thing, and that's to find the truth behind a mystery. He's always asking questions to see if he can find the truth behind something that's going on. Now, me and my brother loved Tintin. It's the first character that we both loved so much that we'd have fights over Tintin and trying to guess what was going to happen next. But the other thing that we also loved was television. Now, oh, I think this is getting in the way. Why is this in the way? Right. Now, the other thing we loved was television. And on television, we had 2 of the biggest cartoons that was, the most famous in school. Now, you guys have about 50,000 channels. We only had 3. And on those 3 channels, 2 of the biggest cartoons were He-Man, Master of the Universe, and She-Ra, Princess of Power. Now, you guys are really young, you might not know who they are, but I know that She-Ra has a new Netflix cartoon. She-Ra was an amazing princess. She fought evil in her part of the universe. He-Man had his own cartoon. He fought evil in his part of the universe. But the legend was, of course, that they were brother and sister. And when they were babies, She-Ra was kidnapped by an evil lord and they grew up separately. Now, me and my brother loved He-Man and She-Ra, but we also loved fighting. And one of the things we'd always do after watching He-Man and She-Ra is have a massive argument as to who could have done what better. My brother thought it was He-Man. He always loved He-Man. I loved She-Ra. So one day in class, knowing that he loved Tintin, I began to draw a series of comic book strips about how She-Ra could beat He-Man at everything he did. And I loved winding my brother up by writing these comic books. And I loved controlling those characters and making them do whatever I wanted. And I haven't really stopped writing since. So I have Tintin and He-Man and She-Ra, both television programs and comic books, to thank for my writing journey, for getting me started. Now I'm going to fast forward to another part of my life, which I think also led me here. Now this is me at the age of about 15, 16. And one morning, on a Saturday morning, I came down the stairs and my mum and dad, instead of having breakfast ready, even though it was their only day off, instead of getting breakfast ready, they were zipping up their coats. And I said to them, "Where are you going? Where's breakfast?" And my mum then said the most important thing that I think anyone's ever said to me. And she said, "We're going to Parliament because there's a march happening. And this march is to say no to a war." And then she asked me the most important question of my life. She asked me, "Do you want to come with us?" Now, I had heard about protest marches, I'd read about them in history books, I'd seen them on the television, but I had never been to one. And I was so excited that my mum was now asking me if I wanted to go, because I said, yes, of course I want to go. Of course I want to go and be a part of this moment in history, and also get to meet other people who are, who believe the same thing as me. So I went down to Parliament, and for the first time ever, I saw hundreds and thousands of people coming together to say no to this war. And that was the day I realized what it meant to be an activist. Now, you will know all about activists because you have books and books about them in your library, hopefully. But an activist is someone who is a bit like Tintin. They're questioning what's going on in the world, and they want to find truth. And then when they discover the truth, they want to do something about it. Doesn't mean you need to go and march with thousands of people. It can mean you being a bit like Tintin and asking questions of yourself. Now, learning what it meant to be an activist meant that I wanted to learn about more activism, and especially women activists. Because when I was your age at school, there weren't many books about how women had changed the world. And it was one of the most annoying things I remember growing up with. I was always asking my teachers, but where was the female Shakespeare? There must have been playwrights who were female writing at that time. Where was the woman who helped the man land on the moon? Where were all these people? And when I got to university, I found out all of these amazing women's stories, and I wanted to work in women's rights. So that's what I got to do. After I left university, I went on to work in lots of human rights charities. And that was it. That was my life. I was really happy doing all of those things. I was still writing, but I was writing a book about chocolate, because chocolate is the most important thing in the world. But I was writing this book about chocolate. I was working in these human rights charities, and my life was pretty much set. There were no plans as yet to write a book like The Boy at the Back of the Class. But then in 2015, so not too long ago, my whole world changed. And this word, the R word, the word refugee, became the most important word. It changed my life in so many ways and is continuing to do so. Now, for those of you who've read the book, and of course, if you're studying about refugees, you will know that the word refugee is very, very special. It means someone who has been forced to leave their home, their town, their city, even their country, maybe, in order to escape something that they have to escape if they're going to survive. Now, if you're a refugee, you have absolutely no free will. You have absolutely no choice in the matter. You have to leave in order to live on. So you can never be a migrant or an immigrant, because we can be migrants and immigrants at any time we want to be. If we choose to leave, for example, if you choose to leave the USA and move to England because you want to come and live here and be near the Queen, or you want to study somewhere different, or you fall in love with someone in another country and you choose to move, that makes you a migrant or immigrant. It can never make you a refugee, because you're not having to run, you're not having to flee the life that you are choosing to leave. Now, that word refugee is so important and so special. And when I read newspaper reports about refugees where they're being called migrants, immigrants, it really makes me angry, because they're using the wrong word. These people have no choice. They have to leave in order to survive. Now, the reason why this word became so important to me in 2015 was because of this little boy. And this little boy really made me wake up to what was going on in the world. Now, if you're a refugee, and we all have the human right to become a refugee, if we ever became a refugee, there's an international law telling us that we can go to wherever we need to, not just in our country, but the whole world until we are safe. But because that law is being broken and refugees are being told you can't use your passport, can't use your money, you have to stay where you are, refugees have to pick really dangerous ways to get to safety, which is really sad. It's really heartbreaking. And Alan Kurdi, this little boy, had to do just that. Now, Alan was a 3-year-old boy who was running away from the war in Syria. I'm sure you've heard of the war in Syria, especially if you've read the book. It's been raging on for 10 whole years. That's 10 years of bombs dropping every single day, of thousands of people being killed and thousands more trying to get away. And Alan, because he was being told as a refugee, along with his family, that you can't go anywhere, you have to stay where you are, they tried to seek help away with some dangerous people. And these people are called human traffickers. Now, human traffickers don't care about refugees, they don't care about anyone. All they care about is how much money can they make per journey, per boat, per car, per truck, whatever it is that they've organized. They want to fit as many refugees onto that vehicle as possible, and try and make as much money as possible. So sadly, Alan and his mum and his dad and his 1.5-year-old brother met one of these human traffickers who told them, give us all your money. We'll get you to somewhere safe, because the government's not going to help you. No one's going to help you. We'll help you. Give us all your money. We'll put you on a boat and we'll push you out and you get to somewhere safe. Now, they gave that human trafficker all their money, but when they got to the boat, they found that it wasn't a sturdy boat made out of wood or metal. It was a rubber dinghy. And I'm sure you've seen them on the news. They're like big lifeboats that you see at the seaside at the beach. But in those lifeboats, you can only really fit in about 8 people. 8 people is the maximum because they're there to save lives. But human traffickers try and squeeze in as many people on those boats as possible. And when Alan and his family got to that boat, they found 30, 40 people squeezed onto this boat. So Alan and his mum and his 1.5-year-old brother managed to squeeze onto that boat. His dad couldn't make it on because there wasn't any room. And the boat was pushed out to sea, and just a few miles out to sea, of course, because there were so many people on that boat, everyone drowned. And this has been going on now for years. We have lost thousands of people at sea because they've been trying to get to safety in those horrible ways. Now, the reason why I'm sharing this story is because Alan led me to start writing and thinking about, you know, refugees around the world. Alan was my Tintin moment. He woke me up and made me start asking questions. Questions like, why was it until his story broke, all the newspaper reports I'd been seeing on refugees only showed young men? And it's still the case today. When you open up the newspaper about refugees, you'll see pictures of young men. You'll never see children and grandparents or women. And it's really, really horrible that their stories get left out. So me and my friends all decided to try and do something about it. We wanted to go out and find out more women and children and see if we could help them, because international laws were not helping them. So luckily, I have a charity called O's Refugee A Team, and we decided to go out to the nearest refugee camp that we could. Now, because I live in England, we're very close to France. There's a train that takes just 29 minutes to get from the shore of England, from Folkestone, Dover, to France. It's the quickest journey anyone will make between two countries, and two continents almost. And we made that journey. It's 29 minutes. We landed in Calais, a place called Calais in France, because we knew two things. We had heard that there were refugees there, that there were lots of women and children. And number two, we chose this place because it was quite close to home. Because I didn't know what I was doing. None of my friends knew what we were doing. All we wanted to do was go out and find these women and children, try and help them however we could. Now, when we landed, I started to ask the way. Started to ask people around me on the streets, where is the nearest refugee camp? Where can we go to help refugees? And when I say refugee camp, of course, you'll probably immediately think of camping, because like myself, I thought that when refugees landed somewhere safe, they would all be given, 3 things that I think make camping bearable. I thought they would be given a sleeping bag, a tent, and fresh water and food, because I think those 3 things, even if you don't like camping very much, those 3 things are the basic things you need to make camping okay, to make camping bearable. But I was very naive, because of course governments are not doing that. And when I landed in the camps that people showed me the direction to, I was absolutely horrified to see what refugees were having to live in and the kinds of areas that they were having to survive in. Now, these kinds of areas are absolutely the most smelliest, boggiest areas you can possibly imagine. It's really good you can't smell a picture, because I can assure you that having to smell this and live in this would be a nightmare for so many, and it is a nightmare for so many. Now, in these kinds of places, there are no toilets or showers, so it doesn't matter if you're a baby who's in nappies, or a 3-year-old who's just learned how to go to the toilet, or you're an 86-year-old. It's really embarrassing, but you have to use the local trees and bushes, which is really dangerous, especially at night. In these kinds of areas, there is no allowance for fire. You cannot light a fire. So even if you're really craving a hot drink, or you need some way to keep warm, or you want to heat up some food, you can't do that, because if you do that, then often the police will come and arrest you. So, and of course, there's a lot of accidents as well that happen with fire. So it's really, really horrific. But unless a volunteer gives you hot food that day, chances are you will go without hot food for quite a long while. And of course, there aren't enough volunteers, so a lot of refugees are stuck in this place for quite some time without even hot food. And not just in those kinds of smelly, horrible, boggy areas. Refugees are also sleeping in really dangerous areas. So this was taken just last year. And it's a derelict chemical warehouse. So it's a really dangerous building which should have been demolished a long time ago. But because it has a roof, refugees are hiding out and trying to sleep there. And this kind of camping trip doesn't just last for a couple of weeks. This can last for years. Even if you're a baby, even if you're a child, even if you're a grandmother or a grandfather who's got cancer or diabetes and needs help, this is the kind of area you're being told you have to stay in, and that you have to survive in. And one of the other questions that I had after Alan's story broke, where were all the women and children? Why were they not being helped? Those were all answered. I've met hundreds and thousands of women and children over the 5.5 years that I've worked in France, and it breaks my heart because their human rights, they're the most vulnerable people in those camps. They are absolutely being ignored. And every time you open up a paper or you see a news story on Facebook or whatever it is that you get your news stories from, every time you see pictures of refugees and they're only showing men, please remember that for every man on that boat, there's probably a family as well who's trying to get to safety. So it's really crucial we be a bit like Tintin and we question what we're seeing and what we're not seeing. Now, there was no plan to write a book called The Boy at the Back of the Class. I didn't go out to the camps thinking, oh, one day I'll write a book about all of this. That was not the plan. But I met some amazing people who changed my mind and who made me want to write this book. Now, for those of you who have the book or you've borrowed the book from the library, you've read it in class together, you'll see that the book is dedicated to a baby called Rayhan, and this is baby Rayhan. Now, this picture makes me really happy, but it also makes me really sad. I met baby Rayhan literally a week after he was born, after we'd been trying to help his mum Zainab. His mum Zainab had travelled over 20,000 miles on foot whilst pregnant, trying to get to somewhere safe. Her country in Afghanistan, her city in Afghanistan had been bombed. She kept going to one city then another and was told, go away, we don't want you here, or you're not safe here, keep on walking. So she ended up in one of those horrible smelly areas, and my team and I were trying to help her have her baby safely. Because if you're a refugee and you're ill or pregnant, and you don't have money, of course, you can't go to the local hospital or doctors. So I met baby Rayhan about a week after he was born, after we'd been raising money to having been born in a hospital. But this picture that I have with him is my first and last moment with him, because just as we were leaving him and his mother that day, waving goodbye, I was saying, I'll see you next week, hoping to see them again. We noticed that the police were coming in. There was a massive van of police and they were moving in. Now, in France, you may have heard of this in the news, you may not, it doesn't always hit the news, but in France, every week or every 2 weeks, the police come in and they do what is called a clearance. Now, a clearance is when the police come in and they destroy everything in a local area. They will burn down tents, sleeping bags, toys, rucksacks, passports, phones, whatever they find, everything gets trashed. And of course, that means that refugees are left with nothing again. And it means that volunteers are always having to try and supply these things again and again and again. And the reason why this happens is because the police and the government there don't want refugees to feel as if they're going to settle, that they are welcome. It's a way to make them feel scared again. So of course, whenever refugees see the police, they run with anything they can carry. And of course, when we saw the police van coming in, just as we were waving goodbye to Rayhan, we realized we might never see them again. And that's exactly what happened. So I'm going to fast forward to half a year later after meeting Rayhan. Again, still no plan to write a book at all, but I fell very ill. And whilst I was ill, all I could think about was, how on earth did someone like Zainab cross those borders on foot when she was so ill, when she was carrying a child? And I've met so many refugees who have been very, very sick and are not getting any medical help. And I was thinking about all of them. And then I thought, well, what's going to happen to baby Rayhan? How is he going to, what if he grows up in one of these horrible campsites and after 8-9 years finally makes it to somewhere safe, but he makes it to a country where nobody understands him, nobody really understands his story? Who was going to look after him? Who was going to make sure that he was going to be okay? And suddenly this title jumped into my head, The Boy at the Back of the Class, and it wouldn't leave me alone. So I began to write this story really for me, and Ahmet in the story is very much my envisioning, my ideal envisioning of what baby Rayhan might go through if he became an 8 or 9-year-old and walked into a school and needed some friends. So really that story has been inspired by this little baby that I met in the camp and who I can't stop thinking about. And I have that picture on my desk, so I think about baby Rayhan every day. Now, the other very special person, aside from Ahmet, is of course the narrator. Now, the narrator, you'll know, loves to give gifts in order to show Ahmet that they want to be, friends. And this story, this narrator's heart is again based on real people. And these are the kind of people that I wish we saw all the time on the news, because they are out there saving lives every single day and nobody knows about them. And I'm like, oh my God, we need to know about them. They're so fantastic. And it's such an honor to get to work with them and get to know them. all of them have hearts like the narrator. So, for example, Caroline there in the blue coat with her hair kind of going up, she also left England just after Ellen KURDI's story in 2015. She told her mum, dad, her family, I'm going to go and try and help for 2 months and I'll be back. But she hasn't come back. She's still there on the ground 5.5 years later, and she refuses to leave until this crisis has been solved by all the governments of the world. Charlie there in the middle with the white t-shirt, he has a little Jeep in his logo. We call him Batman because what he's done with his Jeep is incredibly clever. Now, one of the questions that I get asked all the time is how come refugees still have their phones? And it's a little bit of a racist question because, of course, the whole world has mobile phones. Why would people in Syria or Eritrea or Nigeria, wherever it is they're running from, not have phones? But that phone can save your life if you're a refugee. Now, imagine that every single thing, every single piece of documentation you've ever owned, your birth certificate, your passport, any proof showing who you are has been destroyed, or you haven't been able to carry it with you. Your mobile phone is proof of who you are, where you've come from, people that you know, and it can literally save your life. So if you're arrested by the police and your phone is not on, you're going to be in incredible trouble. So Charlie has made his Jeep into a moving Wi-Fi center, and he uses rubbish. So he collects rubbish and he makes them into, he recycles rubbish to create energy points, so plug-in points, so that refugees can charge their mobile phones and stay safe. So he's absolutely a genius. And the other two women there are phenomenal. The lady in the scarf is called Ruhi. She's now in Greece. She's going to be there for 3 years. She was a nurse. She's given up her job to go and take care of hundreds of thousands of refugees every single week. Just amazing, amazing people, and they're all out there, and they're exactly like the narrator. Their hearts are so open, and all they want to do really is help the person in front of them. They don't care about their stories. They don't care, that these people have nothing. All they want to do is to be their friend. So the narrator really is born from these amazing people. Now, I'm going to quickly see how much time I've got because I don't want to. 2032. Okay, we're good. We are good. Okay, so one of the questions that I get asked is, why don't refugees stay where they are? Why don't they stay? Can't they stay where they are? Can't they fight? Can't they fight back or somehow live on from where it is, whatever it is they're flying from or fleeing from? And the answer to that is really based on us knowing what's going on in the world. And I don't know what it's like in the USA, but over here, we really don't see much of international news. We'll see things that are affecting us, but we won't hear about, for example, the 76 wars that are going on in the world right now. And when we are asked these questions, like, why don't refugees just stay? I always say, look, you can't stay in a place like this. You have to run. If you survive something like this and you're on the, you're trying to look for a hospital or somewhere to get help, chances are there is nothing left. There is absolutely nothing left. This is desperation on another level that hopefully none of us will have to ever endure. Now, according to international laws, of course, civilian areas, hospitals and primary schools and secondary schools should not be bombed, but of course they are. So this is a hospital in Damascus. So imagine that you survived one of those bombs. You're on the way, you're really hurt, you're trying to look for somewhere to get healed, looking for a doctor, and there's no one there. There's absolutely nothing there. So you have to move, of course you do, to try and stay safe. And one of the other things that I think the world kind of forgets when we talk about refugees is the kind of beautiful lives they had before any of this happened. So this is a beautiful UNESCO heritage site in Damascus. This is a place that my friends went to before the war started. It's places that we dreamed of going because they were so stunning. And even though they're meant to be protected by the whole world, they have been absolutely bombed and shelled. Even that, that rich history and that ancestry has been completely lost. So we need to remember, if you're ever lucky enough to meet a refugee family or a refugee child, to remember what it is they've been through. Now, in the book, Ahmed can't speak English, so of course he is trying very hard to convey his story, and the way he does that is through drawings. Now, those drawings have been illustrated by a professional illustrator, but they are real drawings. She took real drawings that we have taken from children when we've asked them in the camps to tell us what their memories were like, to show us what they've been through. And when you see these drawings coming out from 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds, and you see what they've actually survived, it's really hard to grapple with the fact that this has been their childhood. So it's really important we understand that even though this is all illustration, that this is real, that this is what they've had to live through. Final question, because you're all doing so amazing. One of the other things that I get asked a lot is, and I see it in the papers sometimes as well, the newspapers, this question, why should we help these people? What have they ever done for us? What have refugees ever given back to the world? And it's one of the most silliest questions that anyone can possibly ask, because if you look into our histories, our culture, what we think of, especially here in Britain as British, or I'm sure it's the same in America, there's going to be American things that we just, we regard as American, but have been gifted to us by refugees. I just want to quickly talk about some of them now. Now, it doesn't matter if you've never studied a day of science in your life, you will know who Albert Einstein is. Now, Albert Einstein was, of course, this genius scientist who's given us so much, foresight into the world's workings, that we're still trying to figure out his theories. I'm sure some of you will grow up to read some of his theories in detail. But Albert Einstein was a refugee. He fled Germany in 1939. He was allowed to use his passport. Unlike Alan Kurdi and thousands and millions of other children and people, he was allowed to use his passport. He was allowed to get on a plane. He was allowed to land safely, and he was given sanctuary by the USA. But as well as becoming this amazing, wonderful scientist, he was also an incredible humanitarian. And Albert Einstein never wanted the world to forget that he was a refugee. So within about 9 months of landing in the USA, what he did was he created the International Rescue Committee, the IRC. Now, that charity is one of the biggest refugee rights charities in the world. It's still going strong long after Albert Einstein has died. And he created that charity with his other refugee friends because he wanted the world to remember that he was a refugee, and he wanted other refugees like him to be given help, to be granted assistance. So it's really important we remember that one person isn't just one story. They have so much history, and that someone like Albert Einstein has left a legacy that is born from his refugee experience. Now, in England, if you ever come to London, one of the first things I know you'll do is hunt down a fish and chip shop, because it's a British dish. We think of it as a British dish. I can't remember if I had fish and chips in New York when I visited, but whenever I have friends visiting from the USA, one of the first things they want to do is go and hit a fish and chip shop. Now, fish and chips is regarded as a British dish, but again, it was gifted to us by refugees hundreds of years ago, Portuguese, Jewish refugees who gifted us this dish. And we made it so much our own that now if we go to Portugal, they don't sell it. They say, well, go back home. We've given it to you. We've given it to you in England and Britain. So it's one of the things I always say to everyone. Next time you have fish and chips, remember that this was gifted to us by refugees. Now, in England, one of the most beloved cars is the Mini Cooper car. But the Mini Cooper car is a gift from a refugee. You can see him right there. His name is Sir Alec Issigonis. He was a Greek refugee. He landed here when he was just 16 years old. And I keep asking people, imagine if we told Albert Einstein, we don't want you here. Imagine if we told Sir Alec Issigonis, we don't want you here, or they drowned at sea. We'd have lost all their amazing achievements and their gifts to the world. And Sir Alec Issigonis's car, the Mini Cooper car, has been in amazing films. It's become iconic of British engineering, and of course, it's contributed billions to the economy. So when you think about these people's stories and what they've gifted to us, it's just incredible. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard Queen. So Queen is a rock and roll band. If you haven't heard of Queen, I'm sure you will at least a few times in your life. It's amazing music. But the frontline singer, Freddie Mercury, is, he's like a godfather of rock and roll. But his real name was Farrokh Bulsara. He fled a war in Zanzibar, and he was granted sanctuary. He was allowed to get on a plane and land here safely. So imagine if we told Freddie Mercury to go away. We don't want you here. Imagine if we told him, you can't use your passport. You have to stay where you are. Imagine if he died, in the country that he was trying to flee. We would never have heard his music, which resounds around the world. Now, I'm sure, like I'm using Google right now to talk to you. I'm using Google, to host this Zoom session. And Google, of course, is one of the biggest information platforms in the world. Now, the co-founder of Google is this amazing, amazing guy called Sergey Brin. He was fleeing the same thing that Albert Einstein was, which is, of course, a horrendous form of anti-Semitism, but he was from Russia. So he left Russia, he fled Russia at the age of 6 years old with his family. Again, he was allowed to use his passport. again, he was allowed to land in the USA, and he went on to create Google. Now, he has talked about his experience as a refugee boy. He's talked about being a Russian boy walking into a US school and being absolutely petrified because he couldn't understand what anyone was saying. And he has also talked about how angry he was that nobody in the US seemed to know what was going on back in Russia. So it's no coincidence that one of the biggest information portals in the world has been gifted to us by a refugee, a former refugee. And of course, over here, one of you asked me if I've ever met the Queen. Yes, I've met her from a distance, but I've also seen Prince Philip, who is her husband. Now, Prince Philip is also a refugee, and I think it's really interesting that we very rarely talk about the Queen's refugee history and the King's refugee history. And you'll find that a lot of kings and queens around the world were refugees, or their families were refugees at some point, whether the Russian family or a Danish family or the British family, royal family. Now, the legend is that Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, the Queen's husband, had to run away from Greece because he was part of the Greek royal family, and the Greek people didn't want a royal family, so they were killing everyone that was in the royal family. The legend is that his mum didn't even have a cot to put him in, so she put him in an orange box, a fruit box, one of those crates that you get in the supermarkets, to carry him to safety. And luckily, they were picked up by a French Navy vessel, and they landed in France, where he grew up, and he went on to marry the Queen of England. So when anybody asks me, what have refugees ever done for us? Why should we help these people? I always say to them, you do know that Prince Philip, the Queen's husband, is also a refugee, right? Because it's really interesting that we don't really talk about it. Now, in literature, Judith Kerr, we've got so many literary kings and queens who are amazing, amazing storytellers, but they were all refugees. And in most books that have been written by refugees, there's always a character that seems a little bit strange, a little bit isolated, a little bit alone, but all they really want is a friend, even if it's just for a cup of tea. And Judith Kerr is one of those amazing, amazing literary landmarks, literary goddesses. And in religion, we're just coming up to Easter. We've just had, having Passover right now for the Jewish faith. We've got Ramadan coming up in a couple of weeks. So all of these major faiths, all of these men whose words are being celebrated and whose lives are being in somehow marked in religious ceremonies, they're all refugees. So when anybody asks me, why should we help refugees? What have they done for us? I always say, well, do you celebrate Christmas? Do you celebrate Easter? Do you celebrate Hanukkah? Do you celebrate Eid? Because if you do, then you're still trying to live the message of a refugee. They were refugees at one point, trying to flee for their lives because of what they believed in. And there are so many men, women, and children like these prophets who are, trying to do the same thing, trying to get to safety because they're being persecuted for what they believe in. Now, I'm going to leave you with some questions to talk about with your teachers another day, but I want you to ask yourself, is Superman a refugee? If he is a refugee, how is he a refugee? Because I can assure you of the answer. And I know what the answer is. I'm sure a lot of you know what the answer is. Same with Harry Potter. Why is Harry Potter a refugee? How did he become a refugee? These are characters that are refugees in our books. These are some of the most famous books, but we don't think of them as refugees. Why is that? The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which I'm sure lots of you have read, one of my favorite stories. These stories feature evacuees, children who've been sent away by their parents in the hopes that they will stay safe, and they are lucky enough to move into this wonderful house where they go on this adventure. But there are thousands and millions of children around the world just like those children, being sent away by their parents trying to get to safety. It's really, really important we understand stories in a different light, because it's really significant to what's going on in the world today. And of course, you have Paddington Bear. Who doesn't love Paddington Bear? So I want to tell you the little bit of the history behind Paddington Bear. Paddington Bear's creator, Michael Bond, was an amazing, wonderful human being who grew up with a family who was very open and warm-hearted. So he grew up with his family taking in refugees. And at the time that Paddington was written, Parliament here in the UK was saying no. In World War II, they were saying no to Jewish refugees being let in, Jewish children being let in. So he created this little character to remind the world that it doesn't matter where refugees are coming in from. They need a family, they need a marmalade. I don't know why there's Marmite in this picture, but we should give it to them, that they deserve to be loved, and they deserve to be to have a family that will look after them. So really, the book hopefully will get you thinking a little bit like Tintin, getting you to ask questions about what's going on in the world, because I really believe that what's being created right now is going to fall on you. We're going to need you to help come up with solutions. And the children that I see growing up in the camps right now, they're not going to school, they're not knowing where they're going to end up. They don't know what's going to happen to them and their families, so they're terrified all the time. So this can, you know, we have babies being born in the camps without birth certificates, so nobody will even know their name if anything happens to them. It's really, really tragic, and I want to know that, you know, I want you to know that you have such a huge part to play in the years to come to what happens to these refugee children, and we have immense power to make sure that we can change things that will, you know, that will help them be in a better place, and become a part of our world in a positive way.
Good luck and stay strong.
Thank you.
And our last question is from Isadora again.
Hi, sweetheart.
Does writing energize you or exhaust you?
Isadora is going to be an amazing journalist, I think, or a lawyer, as well as a writer. You can do all these things. It is both. So it energizes me when I'm in the mood and I'm feeling like, yeah, this is going really well. And then when I get bored, or when I don't, you know, I'm tired and I've got a deadline, then I'm really exhausted and I kind of cry and have lots of chocolate. So it's ups and downs. It's like school. You have good days and bad days. It's homework. One day it's great, next day you hate it. So it's everything in life is like that. So you just have to plow through if you believe in what you're doing and what you're writing.
We'll end on that note. It is now 4:01 here. So thank you so much. I think everybody really enjoyed hearing your story and the story of the book. And yeah, thank you so much, and good luck on future books. Oh, I know that you've definitely gotten some fans after everyone read this book. So we'll keep our eyes peeled for a new release.
Well, thank you so much, guys. You did amazing. Go have an amazing afternoon. And whatever you love doing, just keep on doing it. Whether it's singing, whether it's poetry, whether it's writing, illustrating, whatever it is, just keep doing it. Mwah. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.